So now that we've got the foundational stuff out of the way, we can dive in and start writing some real C# code. And what we're going to do in this particular example is see how to read information from and write information to the console window. And this is important to know how to do because for the rest of the course, we're basically going to be building examples that use the console as the place where we write information to and read information from. So we need to get a fundamental understanding of how the console works in order to do that. So I've opened up under Chapter 3 the Hello World project in the example files folder. And if you don't have that, you can just simply create a new project and follow along. The other thing I've opened up is the example snippets.txt file. And this contains the code that I'm going to be copying and pasting from so that you don't have to sit there and watch me type. So let's go back to the program. You can see that we have our Hello World project. And down here in our main function, this is where we're going to be filling the code in. So let's go ahead and do something really simple, which we've already done a couple times, but just for refresher, let's write some information out to the console. So I'm going to copy this line right here. It says console.writeLine. I'm going to paste that in. So the console object has a series of functions that read and write data, and the most common ones are writeLine and readLine. And you can guess what they do. WriteLine writes out a string of text followed by a carriage return, which takes the cursor back to the new line. Now, we could just use write, which writes out the string and does not put a carriage return on there, but for readability, we'll just use writeLine. And then there's the readLine function, which reads a string of text. In this case, I'm using it just to keep the console window up so you can see the example working, but it will return a string if we wanted to. So let's just go ahead and save this, build it. You see the build succeeded, and run it. And no surprise, the string hello world gets written out to the console. So let's go ahead and make a couple of changes here. What I'm going to do now is go back to the snippets. And this time we're going to read information from the console window and then write it out. So I'm going to copy these 3 lines, paste them in. So now what we're going to do is write out a string that says, what is your name? And then we're going to use the readLine function to read a string of data from the console and then write out a message that says, hello there, plus whatever name the person gave us. So you can see here that we've got a string variable that is being assigned to the result of the readLine function. Down here, we're just not using the result, which is why the window is staying up. But here, we're actually going to read the result and use it in the next string. So I'm going to save, I'll build, and we'll run. And you can see it says, hello world, what is your name? And I'm going to type in Joe. Hit return, and it says, why hello there, Joe. Let's go take a look at the code and see why that works. So you can see that the string variable here that gets returned from readLine contains my name. And then in the writeLine statement, we're writing out the string, why hello there, and then plus the string here. Writing strings out to the console window takes many forms. It's something that you'll probably do a bunch. And although you can use the plus operator, there's actually other ways to write strings out. So let's take a look at how those work. To build strings in C# for the purposes of displaying to the user or formatting them for output, there's a couple of ways you can do this. Now, you've already seen the example where we use the plus operator. This is something that you're probably familiar with if you've done this in JavaScript. It works in JavaScript, and as you've seen, it works in C# too. However, it's not the most efficient way to build strings in C# for reasons we'll see later on. There are other ways to format strings for display to the user. And the way that we do that is by using the string.format method. And that method takes an argument, which is the string you want to write out, along with data that you want to put into that string. So for example, if we wrote string.format, there are, and then some code that we'll get back to in a second, seconds in a year, and then an argument, which is probably a number. The way that you format a string is by using those curly braces with an integer number in there that serves as a placeholder for data that's going to be inserted into the string for you. And as you might have guessed, if you had more than one piece of data you wanted to do this with, you would use more than one curly brace. So in this example, it says string.format. There are something seconds in a year, and that little I is going to be substituted where the 0 is in those curly braces. And in fact, it substitutes the entire thing. The curly braces and the 0 don't appear in the finished string. It gets substituted with the value of the data. If you had more than one, you'd simply use more than one curly brace, and you'd increment the number for each one of the variables. So in this case, if I had 2 arguments that I wanted to format into the string, I would simply supply those as arguments and use 2 sets of curly braces in the string.format argument. So let's go back to the code and see how this works. So I'm going to go back to my snippets, and I'm going to copy this line right here. I'll paste it in. And so now we have a variable called mySeconds, which we are calculating. So there's 60 seconds in a minute times 60 minutes in an hour times 24 hours in a day times 365 days in a year. And that gives us the number of seconds in 1 year. So you can see here that we have our console.writeLine, and we have our string with the curly brace. Now notice we're not using the string.format method, and that's because the writeLine method of the console object knows how to use the string.format method internally. So we pass it what is called a format string, which has this little escape sequence or code sequence in it. And we're passing in the mySeconds variable. And when we run this, if everything goes well, then we should have the number that's calculated inserted into the string. So let me go up here and just comment out the code that we're not using, and we'll save. This time I'm also not going to use F6. I'm just going to hit F5, which builds the program for me and runs it. So I'm going to collapse 2 steps down to 1. I press F5. And you can see that the number of seconds in 1 year has been substituted where those curly braces were in the string. We're going to be using console.writeLine and console.readLine to write and read information to the console throughout this course. And after following the example here, you can see how to do it for yourself.